Wolf Blitzkrieg International News Network. Today, I'm standing outside of the containment structure for reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant. Just a few miles away, there is an ongoing conflict between Russian and Ukrainian soldiers, but that is not today's subject. Today, we're going to take a look back 40 years to the nuclear disaster that shook the world.
April 1986. The world is still locked deep into the Cold War, a decades-long struggle between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. This isn't a shooting war, but a constant competition for global influence, military strength, and technological dominance. From nuclear weapons to the space race, each side is trying to prove its system is stronger, smarter, and more advanced. Nuclear power sits at the center of that rivalry, symbolizing progress but also carrying enormous risk. And in the Soviet Union, that risk is about to become a reality. In the early hours of April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, reality is about to provide a very harsh awakening. Nuclear engineers prepare for a safety test inside reactor number 4. The test is supposed to demonstrate how the reactor can function during a power outage. Instead, a chain of human errors, poor training, and flawed reactor design triggers an explosion. The massive blast is unlike anything seen before at nuclear power plants. The core is exposed and radiation pours into the atmosphere. The radiation cloud that discharges from Chernobyl envelops all of Europe, Northern Asia, and eventually circles the entire globe. Russian nuclear engineers and technicians knowingly sacrifice themselves in desperate containment efforts. And tragically, the casualties continue to mount as incredible efforts are made to contain the radiation. But this isn't just a technological failure. It is a systemic one. The Soviet system is a system built on secrecy and control, only making matters worse. Local officials hesitate. No one wants to report bad news up the chain. Orders are followed and not questioned. Critical design flaws in the reactor, known but not shared. Even as radiation spreads, the nearby city of Pripyat isn't immediately evacuated. Why? Because admitting failure was seen as more dangerous than the failure itself. Across Europe, radiation alarms begin to sound, not in the Soviet Union, but in Sweden. Only then does Moscow acknowledge that something has gone terribly wrong. 7 years earlier, the United States faced its own nuclear scare, the 3 Mile Island accident. Then, President Jimmy Carter was an experienced nuclear engineer from his days in the United States Navy. In fact, Carter personally visited the site in Pennsylvania to assess the situation and reassure the public. 3 Mile Island shook public confidence, but it also revealed something different. Information flowed. The press reported freely, and investigations followed. It was messy, but it was open. At Chernobyl, the opposite was true. Chernobyl disaster lands at a pivotal moment in history. In Washington, President Ronald Reagan is calling the Soviet Union an evil empire, but also beginning to explore diplomacy. In Moscow, a new leader is trying to reform the system. His name? Mikhail Gorbachev. Chernobyl becomes a turning point. Gorbachev later admits the disaster exposed the deep flaws of the Soviet system, its secrecy, inefficiency, and resistance to the truth. Gorbachev advocates for glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, or reforming the old Soviet system. Entire regions are evacuated, and hundreds of thousands are displaced. The long-term health and environmental effects will last for generations, and the world is watching. Chernobyl didn't just contaminate land, it exposed a system where fear of failure led to greater failure, where silence made disaster worse, where the truth came too late. Just 5 years later, the Soviet Union itself will collapse. Chernobyl wasn't the only cause, but it was a warning, one the world could not ignore. And today, Chernobyl lies in a war zone between Russia, Ukraine, and Belarusia.
Those sirens that you hear are an air raid warning. At this moment, Russian hypersonic missiles are inbound. We've been warned to take cover. This is Wolf Blitzkrieg, International News Network. I'm out of here.